Fat is bad for you.
I just pop a pill and I'm fine.
Meat is murder. It's time for bad food punishment. It's time for real nourishment. It's time for the nutrition heretic.
The following program is provided as information only and may not be construed as medical or health advice. It is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any disease. No action or inaction should be taken solely on the basis of the information provided here. Please consult with a licensed healthcare professional or doctor on any matter relating to your health and well-being. Hello and welcome to another episode of The Nutrition Heretic. This is Adrienne Hugh, The Nutrition Heretic. And today in the studio, I have Graham Ellis of Pono Solutions Consulting. One of the reasons why I wanted him on the show is because, if you remember a few weeks back, I interviewed Bruce Fife, who is the father of most of the books that we now know about coconuts and coconut oil and coconut water and the benefits to people. And if you remember correctly, I was talking about my trip to Jamaica about 7 years ago now. Went to see some cousins, some long distant cousins that we hadn't seen and we lost touch with because their father, who was my mother's brother, he had died when she was younger. So when she moved to the United States, long story, they lost touch with we lost touch with that part of the family. So when we go to Jamaica, we find that the kids there don't know a lot of their local foods. One being the coconut. So my daughter Daisy, who at the time was 5, she had to introduce her Jamaican cousins, Jamaican born and raised, never been off the island cousins, to the beauty of coconut water, because otherwise they were drinking this nasty stuff called, they didn't even come up with a good name for it. They just called it bag juice. It was just colored sugar water, came in a bag, and they would suck on these things all day. Meanwhile, there were coconuts above their heads full of the most delicious coconut water you could imagine. And they had no use for it, or they didn't think they had a use for it, but in their minds, this was progress. As part of progress, we teach our kids that they don't have to rely on the food from the land, and they can just get anything they want at the corner store, no matter how damaging it is to their health. Another thing that I touched on was that coconut oil is almost completely gone. I did see a few brands in one supermarket in Kingston, and that supermarket, I could tell just by the way they looked in the bottle that many of them were tainted. You could tell which ones in this cold supermarket were still liquid, which is a sign that they've been mixed. I mean, because these supermarkets, not the small ones, but the bigger ones, they were freezing inside. And the coconut oil was purely liquid at what had to be well below 70 degrees. So it was clear, and I actually bought some for comparison, and you could taste the difference. They had a greasy slick to them, probably more like car oil than coconut oil. And not that I've tasted car oil, but I can imagine it not being very palatable. And then also there was the flavor, which was totally off, even compared to a coconut oil that's been fumigated in the typical ones that we would see here in the United States. So that was really disappointing because one of my cousins was suffering from arthritis. Actually, 2 of my cousins were suffering from arthritis, their brother and sister. The sister, she liked the idea of what I was saying, and she started making coconut oil again. A couple of weeks later, she calls me up and tells me all of her joint pain is gone. Her brother, on the other hand, decided that, that was heresy and continued eating margarine and using bees to sting himself so that he could get rid of his joint pain. It's not rocket science, but there are certain things that when we start to look at our health problems, we have to start questioning, what have we changed since these health problems have occurred? So with that, I wanted to introduce Graham Ellis. Like I said, he is from Pono Solutions Consulting. Here in Hawaii, and he grew up in a very different world from us, and I think he can kind of relate to this false promise of progress that I was discussing just a moment ago with my cousins. Welcome, Graham.
Hello.
You can't nod on radio. Okay.
I did grow up in England, it's true, 65 years ago. And I certainly had a different experience to the typical American consumer of food in this culture today. My grandmother actually never had a refrigerator.
Oh, wow. So
ever.
Icebox. Or
No,
not even that.
no icebox.
Ooh.
She just had a cool box in the little alleyway by the side of her house. So spending summers with her, it was not an expectation of mine that I would have foods from a refrigerator. In fact, the tradition in my family and many families in Europe, in fact, is to go shopping every day for fresh food and buy small quantities. That's what my grandmother did, and that's what my mother did, until we moved from the town where I was born out into the country. When we were in the country, and we didn't have a car until I was 10 years old, we didn't have to worry about food because the food came to us. We actually had a milkman, as is the tradition in Britain, come every morning. We had a butcher who drove his van and supplied us with local meats that he himself had butchered.
Wow.
We never knew what was coming. He would just bring what he had and we'd select from that. But most significantly, we actually had our fruits and vegetables and a number of other items too delivered to us by the local farmer with a horse and cart. And I'm talking I'm talking the 20th century now, not the 19th century. I'm only going back to my childhood, which is about 55 years, when I was, up to the age of 10 or 12. He delivered every single week fresh vegetables that he'd harvested from his farm. And that was how we lived. We didn't have any packets, cans, tins of any significance until probably I was 14, 15. In fact, I remember in England, the very first time pasta and rice were sold commercially in supermarkets. There were advertisements on the television, which we just got by then, to teach English housewives how to prepare and cook pasta and rice. Because up until that point, as far as carbohydrates are concerned, they had only ever cooked potatoes. We bought our potatoes in a 112-pound sack.
Right.
And they kept us through, well, I wouldn't say all the winter because I had 4 siblings, but a considerable amount of time. And they were, of course, all purchased from the local farmer. Life was very different. We didn't shop in supermarkets. There was no such thing. And I think we ate a lot more healthy than people do today.
Right. And this is always interesting to me because when you look at longevity rates, England is not too shabby. I mean, you've got a decent number of centenarians, and they all grew up that way. What a lot of people don't seem to connect is that the centenarians of today had a very different start to life than the kids who were born today.
Yes, living a long life was not dependent upon
medical intervention.
Medical intervention is what I was going to say, and supplements. In fact, the culture that I grew up in, and to a large extent still adhere to today, is one in which if you're eating healthy, you don't need supplements.
Right.
The culture that I experienced when I came to the United States was, we're not eating healthy, so we sure need a cupboard full of supplements. And it was horrifying to me to see educated people needing to supplement their nutrition with pills and potions, and to see the extent to which health food stores were packed with artificial foods.
Well, I completely agree. One thing that I would add to that, though, is the fact that our food supply, first of all, we've raped the topsoil. The topsoil is not there. Studies going back to the 40s looking at the nutritional quality of food in America has shown that the soil is depleted. And while in best case scenario, I want to say, no, we shouldn't have to have supplements. I do find that a lot of people, no matter how well they eat on American soil, need that. They can go to other parts of the world and they're fine. But they come here and this is a huge problem.
That is a product of the monoculture system that we've had that has depleted the soils, and chemical fertilizers. It's a great tragedy. I actually wanted to follow up your story about Jamaica
Yeah.
with how I got to Hawaii.
Okay. Yeah. Please
Because
do.
I actually was living in the Caribbean
Oh.
directly before coming to Hawaii. That's where I learned to eat from the land of foods that were tropical. And so I ate all the local foods down there. And when I came to Hawaii, it was horrifying to me the first week I was here to see the amount of food that was in people's yards and gardens and in some cases farms just falling on the ground. Because in the 4.5 years I lived in St. Lucia, I never saw a single avocado, mango, breadfruit, orange, lemon, lime, coconut, nothing on the ground.
Right.
Everything was eaten. And I couldn't believe it that I came here and there was all kinds of good quality food just rotting or being eaten by pigs, whilst people were going to the store and buying oranges from Florida and avocados from California.
Don't even get me started on that.
And I mean, it just didn't make any sense to me. But once again, it's a product of the American consumerism and the one-stop shop. You go one place and think you buy everything that you need. But coconut oil actually was introduced to me in St. Lucia.
Okay.
The local people in the village where I lived the last year I was there made it themselves on over charcoal fires.
Yeah, that's how my cousin makes it as well.
And it's a very slow process, but it's the most aromatic and tasty coconut oil that you can imagine. It was available in all the stores when I was there. I cooked with it. I didn't know any other oil. However, when I brought it back, as I did, from the village where I lived to Canada, to friends, nobody thought about cooking with it. They were just rubbing it over their bodies and using it as a body lotion, which was very
Just
funny.
fine, yeah.
And it's fine, but there they were, not realizing the nutritional benefits of a very small scale, locally produced product. And such is the way people prefer their packaging and something they've seen advertised on television, which is very sad.
It is, because what I find funny about that, sorry to cut you off, but one of the things I find funny about that is that we don't trust, politicians, the government with anything. But when it comes to our health, we're just like, oh, well, the government wouldn't allow it to happen if it wasn't good. So somehow it's vetted already by the time it gets to TV, because it's been through all of these agencies and these government officials making the decision for you.
Absolutely. There are many areas in which the government don't know best. And food is definitely one of them. And obviously, once again, it's an example of the influence that large food producers have in terms of lobbying and the creation of legislation. I did want to mention another experience I had soon after arriving in Hawaii. Actually, I came here as a teacher, but needed to start a business when my teaching job fell through. I started producing macadamia nut butter. And I was actually the first commercial producer of macadamia nut butter here on the island. And it grew and grew in the islands here. It was a very natural, organic product through health food store distribution. And I got the opportunity to package it and ship it to the mainland in little glass jars. And so I traipsed off to some food shows on the mainland to promote my business and the new product. And it was remarkable at these trade shows where there'd be hundreds of people every day coming by and tasting samples, how time and time again, even though I had big signs up saying macadamia nut butter, and obviously on the jars and the labels it was all macadamia butter. People would eat it and describe it as, "Oh, you mean this macadamia peanut butter?" And it was always peanut. No, it's macnut. It's different nut.
Right,
And
exactly.
I realized there the depth to which people in regards to food, are indoctrinated in terms of, what they eat and what they think is food, and very narrow-minded. And I had a hard job getting people to convert from peanut butter to macadamia butter. And I discovered after reading about this that, and this is a very interesting cultural lesson, that people will move to a different country, get a different job, speak a different language, live a totally different lifestyle. They can change their religion, but they'll keep eating the same food, which is why we have so many foreign
corporations,
restaurants, in small restaurants,
so
Thai, Indian.
I was going to say, but
to
also
cater to local tastes. But that is a true fact. People are very resistant to changing their food habits.
See, and
And
I
that's the
love
challenge.
eating other people's food. It's just bred in me. There's so much opportunity and choices. The other day I was at the farmer's market, and an older Hawaiian-born Chinese woman, she was eating Thai food for the first time. She looked like she was about 65, and she goes, I don't know why I didn't eat this before. I used to always give it the eye. And then she said it was the most delicious thing she'd had in a long time. I'm like, yeah,
Well, that's great.
it pays off to try something new every once in a while. So tell me, when you think about sustainability, because that is your domain, let's say, and well, at least within the scope of this conversation, what do you lament that has gone away, and what do you, because you just recently got a grant to promote sustainability within the islands, and that's one of the reasons why we were kind of put together to start talking, because this has been my pet peeve as well since I've come here. I send my kid to school with plantains, and all the kids give her the eye. They stare at her like she's crazy, because they're like, "What the heck are you eating?" I'm saying it's that thing that grows up there and like right above your head, and it's one of your native foods. So, what do you lament about the loss of since your childhood that you're trying to bring back in a way through this grant?
Well, first, let me say, before talking about the grant, that I am presently the president of the Hawaii Sustainable Community Alliance, and was the founder of that organization back in 2012. And I've been actually living a sustainable lifestyle for about 25 years. I lived on solar power, catchment water, been growing my own food, and on and on and on. The Alliance brought me together with a lot of other people involved in that movement, and I've been studying this since I've been in Hawaii, which is 35 years now. And I think the Hawaiian Islands are a very good example of what sustainable living used to be, and potentially what it could be. Because before the white man actually came as an invasive species here.
And I just like to underscore that it was a Brit.
The notorious Captain Cook, yes. Indeed. Up until he came, the Hawaiian Islands were inhabited by about the same population that exists right now, according to most of the historians that have researched population, which is over 1 million people. They had been here without contact from the Western world for 1,500 years or so, and they lived 100% sustainably. Mm-hmm. They didn't import anything. And I'm using sustainable in the sense of not importing anything, and in a regenerative sense, in that they replaced what they took. Right. And in fact, if it was soil, they made the soil more fertile. Mm-hmm. It was a fruit tree, they were pruning the fruit tree to make it produce more. If it was a taro bed growing taro, They made sure that they nurtured it with all the nutrients so that it would grow more taro in the future.
Right.
Nothing was done to deplete, deprive, and eliminate until the white man came. And then they started importing foods and replacing the foods that had supported them for well over 1,000 years, slowly, and adopting a foreign food culture.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, we've got, after the Second World War, the notorious introduction of Spam, which, according to statistics, now puts Hawaii just after Guam as the world's highest consumer of Spam per head of population. So, there's been a continuous movement away from sustainable food production here. So what I've tried to do is look at that, think about that, study that, and ponder on, how possible is it to return to that, not completely, but move in that direction. Luckily, coming from the Caribbean, I was familiar with eating breadfruit, and that was a big start for me. I planted breadfruit trees on the land where I lived, and that's the equivalent of the Englishman's potato.
Right. Well,
that's something you can eat every day, and 9 months of the year it's producing.
And that is the reason why Hawaii was on the map, because wasn't Captain Cook looking for a source of breadfruit?
That's Captain Bligh.
Oh, sorry, Captain Bligh.
That's
sorry.
all right. But the Tahitians, it was one of the canoe crops that was brought to Hawaii because it sustains people. Now, unfortunately, not only have a lot of the breadfruit forests been destroyed to grow sugarcane or coffee or something else, but even Hawaiians, sad to say, have eliminated breadfruit from their daily diet. Now they'll eat it at a luau as a special treat, but most of the ones I
talk to, they don't even know how to eat it, and I have to show them and make it for them, and
it's very sad. And it's been replaced by rice, which is of course all imported. There's no rice grown on the islands here. Rice is now the staple, which is totally unsustainable. But in terms of what is sustainable, as I mentioned, locally produced is a very big part of it for me. A number of years ago, we contemplated a situation whereby what would we do if the barges stopped running? And this isn't a hypothetical, what if, it's a question of when. Because the world as we know it is increasingly full of, growth of natural disasters, earthquakes, hurricanes, tsunamis, terrorism, strikes. There's a number of different reasons why barges could stop coming to Hawaii. And if they did, we're faced with a situation where currently we import about 85% of all the food that is consumed here. Now, we know that it is possible to produce 100% of all the food that would sustain us. But sustaining and consuming are two different things, because people want to consume what they choose, not eat what is available. And for me, that's where sustainable living begins, is looking at what food do you actually have existing. Right. And one of the big shockers for me coming from the Caribbean is for example, apart from breadfruit, avocados and oranges, which I already mentioned falling on the ground, but nobody here ever seems to eat the yellow guava. Now, down in the Caribbean, you've probably heard the reggae song, guava jelly, guava jam, right? It's a locally available product. All the markets, they're selling yellow guavas. Now, people here just turn their nose up. There's no reason. It's a perfectly good food, but they eat grapes from
Mexico or Argentina or whatever.
All kinds of imported foods from everywhere else, but they don't eat local fruits. And so, sustainable eating, sustainable food sources means eating what grows locally. Learn to love what loves to grow where you live.
And that's one of the wonderful things about your story is that you didn't know what was coming from the butcher. He had something that week, and that's what you got, and that's what you made do with. You. There's got to be something to be said for the fact that a lot of people don't know how to cook and don't know how to consume these foods. How do we start training people and getting them interested in learning about it?
Well, thank you. That leads me into the grant that I just wrote.
Okay, great.
and received from USDA Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Project. And my proposal to them was to stimulate the demand for locally grown foods through the farmers markets that we have here on the Big Island. And I will be going to 18 farmers markets. I'm going to be researching what foods they have available, and I'm going to be looking at ways to publicize, advertise, and market those foods through adapting existing cookbooks.
I'll do food demos if you need some.
Food demos, definitely. Through promoting lists of foods that are in season at different times and available at different farmers markets, because we have a variety of climates on the island. So some time of the year we'll have certain foods here in Waimea, but other times we don't. They're out of season, but they're in season in Kona.
Right.
And so I will be advertising that and providing materials to the vendors when I go back a second time for them to share with their customers. I'm also going to be looking at the opportunities for farmers to produce value-added products with the foods that they grow, because value-added products enable them to actually make more money than just selling the raw foods. And
sorry, can you just explain in case people don't understand what value-added means?
Well, a value-added product would be a jam, for example, or jelly.
Right.
Something you actually make with the fruit, or sauerkraut that you make with cabbage.
Or cheese that's made from milk.
Anything that you do more work and you get more money.
And that people aren't necessarily willing to do it themselves.
Yeah, well, there's some natural barriers. One of them is our government. Because of the rules and regulations that are required. It has to be produced in a commercial kitchen, has to be packaged in a certain way with a certain label and certain size print. And certain products have to have barcodes. But these are things that, as I mentioned through my macadamia nut butter experience, I've had to deal with, and I'm going to be helping other vendors to deal with legal obstacles that are involved.
That's huge, because as you know, I was selling some Jamaican spices at the market. You know that, right? So I was making Jamaican jerk spice at the market, and I called it my Jamaican jerk cock rub because it goes with my book. And so I was making it and just getting through the legalese of that, and making sure everything was up to code. As a matter of fact, I have a friend who does chai at the market, and he's recently been having issues because the acidity level rose during storage, and now it's not within the below 4.2 or whatever acidity level it's supposed to have to be in storage, and so they want to basically change the product, and he's saying, but if I change the product, it's not good chai the way it was when I originally gave it to you. So it's working through that, and obviously we don't want to give anybody botulism or what have you, but yeah, these are things that, and one of the things that I ran into was that I wanted my jerk rub to be a wet rub the way it's normally used, but I ended up having to do it as a desiccated dry rub, which actually turned out pretty darn good, if I do say so myself. But I had to do it that way because it was difficult to figure out how to get the acidity where I needed it without spending $40 each time to get the state to test it. And, do I add a teaspoon of lime or do I add a cup? I don't know. And if I add a cup, that's not the same recipe anymore.
Yeah, these are the obstacles that people have, and they need help. Farmers aren't normally equipped with that kind of information, and they need help to get it. So in my research and education project at farmers markets, I'm going to be doing that. I'm also going to be contacting people who presently consume a high percentage of locally produced foods, because I want to, and I've proposed, and it was accepted in my grant application, to publicize the fact that these people are out there. Some of them, I've got friends from where I lived in Pune who are 60, 80. I've had friends that have actually gone 100% locally, and I'm talking Big Island foods for a period of time. And I think that they can be good role models for other people to look themselves at, well, how much, what percentage of the foods that we actually are eating are grown on the island, because we've got to change that statistic. 85% is imported. Now, as I mentioned, if the barges stop running, we're in serious trouble.
Although those of us who know how to cook these indigenous foods, we're going to be rolling in dough.
If we know where to find
if we know where to find. And yes, because as a matter of fact, after we're done here, I want you to hook me up with breadfruit, because that has been my pet peeve, like I was saying. Sure. I'm looking for it all the time, and I would say that I probably eat upwards of 70% local grown, whether from my garden
Excellent.
Or from the farm that you work at.
Well, you might be one of the people that I picked to publicize.
And I mean, if you try, you can find. And so, yes. Go down.
It can be done.
It can be done.
We need to inspire and motivate other people to do it.
One of the things that I was just discussing yesterday is getting local macnut oil.
Oh.
And I know somebody, and because one of I love my olive oil.
Yeah.
But if I can make a salad with macnut oil,
I can help you. I've been using macnut oil for the last 3 years. There's a producer down in Pune, and it's usually available through the Locavore store.
That one is not good for making mayonnaise.
Okay.
I'll put it that way. But I do have another one right up here in on the Hamakua coast.
Good.
They have a lighter one that.
Well, that's what I'm hoping to do too, is to point out to people that, for example, macnut producers presently are selling macnuts. The macnut industry, for example, is a very, very hard industry to make any money at. The margin is very, very low. Why?
And it's a tough nut to crack.
Because the farmers don't do value-added products for the most part. They sell them in 1,000-pound sacks to big companies that make chocolates out of chocolate-covered macnuts and
or garlic flavored.
Commercial products. But if they learn more about the possibilities of making macnut oil or macadamia nut butter or other products that we need here in order to be locally sustainable, then we're in a win-win situation. Right. The farmers will make more money. They'll become more prosperous. We're going to encourage more people to farm. And we will benefit because we won't be bringing in imported foods.
Don't you think that to some extent there's an issue for a lot of farmers where they're straddling two lives, because they have the macnut as their kind of pet passion project, and then they've got their day job, which could be corrupt for all we know. What I'm saying it's not necessarily something that aligns with their vision, let's say, but it's the one that pays the bills, and so it's making that transition where they can now slowly let go of that side of the life to invest the extra time to make the oil, to make the value-added products. Do you think that's part of the equation?
Yeah, I'm looking to promote demand. I believe that the supply will come if the demand is there. If we've got more people like yourself out there looking for macadamia nut oil that they can make mayonnaise with, there will be farmers who will produce it.
Right.
If at the right price, if it's profitable for them, they will make it. We can't just leave it to the farmers to be everything. Entrepreneurs, marketeers, retail outlets, we have to help them. And we can do that by demonstrating that there are demands for different products. And, hopefully through the educational work that we're both involved in, is show people how they can substitute, let's say, imported olive oil or other oils for locally produced macadamia oil in recipes that they're using.
Exactly.
They need to know that it can be done.
I have to tell you,
create the demand for the product.
at Christmas time, I made a salad and brought it to a friend's house, and I used McNutt oil in it. And everybody said, "What is in the salad? It's so good." And, well, a little local honey, a little. When I say little local honey, I think the whole salad maybe had a quarter teaspoon of honey, just to bring out some of the sweetness of the beets and other things I put in there. And then the McNutt oil just gave it this very balanced flavor and brought everything together, and they just went head over heels for it. So it's, we're not necessarily sacrificing anything other than maybe saving a few dollars in some cases, and working more with the planet to rely less on the fossil fuels and so on, and packaging that it costs to bring those things in. Because even just throwing away the glass bottle, yeah, it's glass and it breaks down, and it's that's okay on that level. But if I can just take my mason jar a couple miles away when I'm in that direction and pick up my McNutt oil, isn't that better?
Hugely. We just have to convince other people that it's worth the extra effort to do that.
Right. It just takes a little organization, right?
Organizational and education. And there is undoubtedly a requirement for a raising of consciousness too. You and I can sit here and agree on the fact that imported foods are actually subsidized.
That's true.
Because of the transportation costs and the real costs of bringing things thousands of miles is not transferred to the consumer, which makes it very hard for the local farmer to compete. Very, very hard. And we can say that because we're conscious of that, but not everyone is. Right. And that's the learning curve.
Right. We're going to wrap up soon, but I did want to ask, do you think there is in some way creating a mystique around Hawaiian products that might actually end up coming from the mainland or Japan for people who are local to really start to appreciate it? Or does it, seriously, because if you think about it, that's kind of why my cousins in Jamaica don't drink coconut water, right? Because they think that everybody in America, which is the land of progress and streets are paved with gold, are drinking some kind of sugary juice, right? Some sugary colored juice, right? So is that going to be part of the equation, is creating demand for our products elsewhere? Do you think, or do you think we can actually do this as a homegrown effort?
I'm hoping we can do this as a homegrown effort. We have the most motivation of anywhere to do that because we are an island and we can identify what local foods are. Local foods are actually produced here on the island. It's a lot more difficult to define that, say, on the mainland. We also are aware that a tragically high percentage of the foods are imported, which puts us at great risk if the transport system is disturbed and would cause a huge amount of trauma if we did. The supermarkets right now are only stocked with not just foods, but every other item that would last us less than, well, they say 11 days. We're out of everything. The supermarkets are empty, and not just foods, but everything, because they've become more and more dependent upon that container arriving on a regular, weekly, bi-weekly basis. And if that doesn't happen, we're in big trouble. And that is a big motivation, which we have here in Hawaii that other places don't feel so intensely. Right. We also have, as I mentioned, the experience to look back on how the Hawaiians did it. They did it very well. They were very, very healthy people. Yeah, very robust. Very robust, very, very big and strong. And this was the same Aina, the same land. If they did it then with the knowledge we have and the knowledge we can get by asking some of our kapuna, we can get back to that, or closer to that, let's say. Right. We can move in that direction. Right. Yeah. I think there's, part of the Hawaiian pride
and the movement by some people to make Hawaii an independent country, et cetera, needs to take this into consideration. And my girls go to a Hawaiian charter school, which is Hawaiian focused, and they're bringing back language and dance and so many elements of that and of the culture. And I keep talking to the principal about, let's do something with food, because these kids, if you want to connect with your culture, that's why the cults, when they want to recruit somebody, they take them away from their food. You tell somebody to eat something that's not their native food or not what they ate with their families, you can rip them away from their families.
Oh yeah.
So this is one of the things that I'd like to see, is just, again, we're speaking from Hawaii. You might be somewhere else in the world, and if you're from Poland or France, what have you, it's going to pertain to you as well. That just taking stock of what your ancestors did to keep themselves, to make you alive today, basically. Because if it was so wrong for so many millennia, then you wouldn't be here today. So we have to have some respect for those traditions, because there's a lot of wisdom to be gained from that. So we're going to wrap up, I think, now, Graham. But one thing that there's so many things that we could continue to talk about, and I know we had a lot of things on deck, and I'm probably going to have you back on those. But I wanted to find out, what can people do where they are, wherever they are in the world. What can they start to do to? Actually, I have another question for you after that. But what can they start to do right now that would make an impact on the environment and on the food systems and give them more security?
I think to support farmers markets, if you have one in your
or start
area,
one. Yeah.
Or
is it that easy to start?
Look for locally grown foods if you do shop in a supermarket. And if you pick up value-added products, packages, tins, just turn the label over and look at where it was produced, and give some consideration to the costs that were involved in transporting it. And the further it's traveled, the more resources were used in bringing that product to your supermarket. And do we want to continue doing that, supporting that? Because that's the oil industry and also exploitive labor industry, because it's been transported through cheap oil and produced cheaply because of cheap labor. We need to support our local farmers if we want to become sustainable. Right.
And I think that's it's important, especially now where people are talking a lot about raising minimum wage and so on and so forth. The money has to come from somewhere. And we, if people want to make more money, we have to make sure that money is getting back into our local systems, don't you think? And not going overseas to wherever, or just a totally different locale. That I think it's important just to keep that money, try and keep it somewhat locally, so that, yes, your neighbors can live sustainably. One thing I found when I was in Switzerland several years ago is the farmers there were living nice lifestyles. They weren't subsidized, as far as I understood. They weren't being subsidized, at least not as heavily as they are here. They were selling apples or foods that were very, very local to them. And the guy he was doing construction on his house, had marble countertops and all the bells and whistles that people want, right, in their homes. You go to a farmer here, you're lucky if they have like electric light. Some of them are just burning kerosene because they don't have the means to do much more than that. And I think that's do we want to see our farmers living in squalor? And I think most of us would agree that that's unjust for them. What was the other question I was going to have for you?
You were going to ask me when I could come back.
Yeah, when can you come back? Because we have a whole thing. Because you know what, sustainability. One of the things that Graham has talked to me about is the fact that sustainability, it doesn't stop with just the food being grown locally, but the stuff that's used to grow the food being grown locally. So I'd like to have you on another time where we can talk about getting going beyond organic and beyond some of these other systems to rebuild the soil, similar to how the Hawaiians did. And I'm sure wherever you are in the world, there was a tradition of keeping the soil alive. And a lot of that is by not monocropping, as we mentioned.
By realizing the wealth is in the soil.
Mm-hmm.
The wealth is in the soil, not from the food that it has produced, but in the soil itself, because that will perpetuate. if you do it right.
Right. So what's one food, this is a question I was going to ask you, what's one food that you have given up that to support sustainability? Like, do you eat rice?
No,
Very
rarely.
Do you eat wheat?
Very little. I'm when breadfruit's in season, I'll eat it twice a day.
I made
every day.
I made, and
my
I should
kids
post
do
this
too.
I should post this on Facebook or something. I made a BLT on breadfruit. It was the best BLT I ever.
All right.
Now, if only I could get the B locally. Actually, I do have local bacon now. But it comes in baby steps, because sometimes it is a matter of sourcing that, and the more you talk about it to people, the more you'll find that other people are interested in it, and the more doors will open. Like, you go to a farmer's market, if you don't know where to find, for example, good bacon, go to a farmer's market, start talking to people. You'd be surprised who the person selling apples knows somebody next door to him who doesn't go to the farmer's market, but slaughters just slaughtered a pig. So anyway, thank you so much, Graham, for being with me today. His website is HawaiiSustainableCommunity.org. He is the president of the Hawaii Sustainable Community Alliance, and you can get in touch with him there if you want to find out about getting local in your neighborhood. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
All right.
Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, and we'll have you back.
Look forward to that.
Awesome. The Nutrition Heretic Podcast is a production of Savor the Journey, LLC. Our audio editor is Nikola Popovich. Our podcast manager is Crystal McLean, and our operations manager is Linda Hansen. I'm your host, Adrian Hugh, the Nutrition Heretic. You can find us at nutritionheretic.com, where you can download the Nutrition Heretic's free shit list of 7 health foods to avoid like the plague. You can also listen to previous episodes at nutritionheretic.com/podcast. Be sure to like us on social media for updates. Our Facebook page is facebook.com/nutritionheretic, and on Twitter @NutriHeretic. Contact us with show ideas, questions, or if you just want to be a guest. And don't forget to rate our podcast on iTunes and Stitcher. Thanks.